Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Steve.
And we're from The Happy Pair. We're super excited to have just launched our first stone-baked sourdough chilled pizzas in SuperValue and select number of Centra stores.
Two delicious flavours, spicy veg and margarita.
Check them out now in a store near you.
Onto your headphones and pour your favorite beverage. It's time for the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. Now, fresh off the sidelines, your host, Matt McPeak.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? This is the Week 7 edition of the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We got 4 teams on bye this week. The Minnesota Vikings, Miami Dolphins, the Indianapolis Colts, and the Baltimore Ravens. So let's jump into it. We got 13 games to get to here. The Steelers at the Titans. James Conner had his third 100-plus rushing yard game of the year last week. Had 20 carries, and he scored. The Titans have allowed the 10th most fantasy points per game to running backs this year, so we're starting James Conner. Chase Claypool led the team in receiving yards on only 4 catches, also scored on one of his 2 rushing attempts. It's back-to-back games with rushing TDs now. He has become a must-start player in this offense. Juju Smith-Schuster got a lot of praise from Big Ben last week because of his unselfishness. Unfortunately, I think Juju is really nothing more than a boomer-bust flex play at this point. There's just so many other options for the Steelers and for Big Ben, and they just don't really need Juju to be a 10-target guy like we want him to be in the fantasy community. James Washington led the team in targets last week with Deontay Johnson out. He was the only Steeler to catch a touchdown last week. The two of them will continue to be annoying to us Juju and Claypool owners, that being Washington and Deontay Johnson, whoever happens to be in there. They're both pretty decent number 3 wide receivers. Derrick Henry. The Steelers' run D has been pretty good, but it doesn't matter. You're starting Derrick Henry over 200 yards last week against the Texans with a 94-yard run halfway through the fourth quarter, showing us all how special he is. People as big as him should not be able to outrun an entire NFL defense, and especially not in the fourth quarter. But this dude is clearly one of those special guys. He gets stronger as the game goes on. A.J. Brown, 2 touchdowns last week. That's now 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. He's also a must-start. Adam Humphries made his return, missed Week 5, but played in Week 6. And caught all 6 of his targets, had the most yards this season with 64, but he scored his 2nd touchdown of the year. He's a good little slot receiver. He's kind of like a clone of Cole Beasley, really. Humphries now has 6 or 7 targets in all 4 of his games he's played in, so he's an option for you if you have multiple wide receivers on bye or if you're dealing with some injuries. Anthony Firkser was officially become a problem for Jonnu Smith owners. Firkser led the team in targets, catches, and yards, and also scored, while Jonnu Smith only had 2 targets, 1 catch for 13 yards last week. McCole Pruitt also scored a touchdown this year. 7 of the 13 receiving touchdowns this year for the Titans have went to their tight ends. They like to use all of them. They'll even throw the ball to an eligible offensive lineman from here or there. Obviously, we'd like to see Jonnu get all those tight end targets, but that's just not the case. Smith had the 2-touchdown game 2 weeks ago, his second 2-touchdown game of this short season. He's still a start, even though the Steelers' defense has allowed the 6th fewest receiving yards to tight ends. We got the Cowboys and the Washington football team. Zeke Elliott had a horrible game last week. 2 fumbles, multiple drops, got 11 targets and only put up 31 receiving yards. But Zeke has averaged over 100 rushing yards per game against Washington in his 7 career games, 9 touchdowns in those 7 games. And how bad Andy Dalton looked on Monday night and the status of the Cowboys' offensive line, I think they try to just run the living crap out of the ball in this game. The Cowboys' wide receiver trio, Cooper and Lamb, each caught 7 of 10 targets. Cooper had 15 more yards and the touchdown. Michael Gallup only saw 6 targets and only had 2 catches for 23 yards. Dalton threw 2 picks, and he probably should have had a third. I think we're all still starting Cooper and Lamb, but I don't know if we can trust Dalton to support 3 wide receivers, and I think Gallup is the odd man out. Dalton Schultz, Washington has allowed the 5th most fantasy points per game to tight ends so far, the 4th most receiving yards, and they're one of only 7 teams that have allowed 5 or more touchdowns to tight ends so far. So Dalton Schultz may just make my tight end touchdown scorer parlay. We'll have to wait and see. Antonio Gibson has I've been on the Antonio Gibson train because I thought that with Washington trailing in all these games that Gibson would be in line to catch a boatload of passes, but it just hasn't really happened. He's averaging 4 targets a game on the season, 5 targets a game over the past 3 games, but it would be great if we were getting a normal running back one's workload, 15, 16 carries in the running game, but Gibson is only getting between 10 and 12 carries a game. So this Cowboys run D is nothing to write home about, but Dallas will score points in this game, I have a feeling. So Gibson is nothing more than a boom or bust, low-ceiling flex play in PPR leagues to me. Terry McLaurin is the best player on the team, leads the team in targets by a wide margin. He's the number 16 wide receiver in half PPR right now, averaging 12.2 points per game, and that's with only 1 touchdown, and it's with horrible quarterback play. But with how bad the Cowboy pass defense has been all year, you got to figure Terry McLaurin will have another good game here. Jets at Bills, the immortal Frank Gore, the inconvenient truth, had the majority of the running back touches and a little over 4 yards per carry last week. He'll continue to get the carries, but I can't start him against this Bills defense, even with 4 teams on bye. Jamison Crowder caught 7 of his 13 targets last week in his first game this year without 100 receiving yards. He obviously doesn't have the same chemistry with Joe Flacco that he did with Sam Darnold, but I think he's still a safe play in PPR leagues. He's literally all the Jets have, and one of the Bills' biggest weaknesses on defense is defending a good slot receiver. So maybe this is Jamison Crowder's game here. Singletary only had 11 touches last week, 12 touches the week before, only 78 total yards over the last 2 games combined. The Jets are the 5th best matchup for running backs this year, so if Singletary has another subpar game here in Week 7, it might be time to sit him and, dare I say, maybe even try and trade him or cut him. The rookie Moss returned from his injury last week and only had 5 touches. Again, the Jets are a great matchup for running backs, but I can't start Moss right now, not until he proves that he's going to at least see 10 touches a game. Diggs is the guy for the Bills. We're still starting him. He's got a touchdown or 100-plus receiving yards in 5 of his 6 games this year. And the 6th game, he had 86 yards on 8 catches. So he's become one of the more consistent players in fantasy football. John Brown only saw 4 targets last week and couldn't haul in any of them. I think he's still not 100%. The Jets are one of 7 teams that have allowed over 1,000 receiving yards to wide receivers already. And of those 7 teams, the Jets have done it on the fewest targets. So the fewest targets against, right? So the Jets are a great matchup for wide receivers too. Cole Beasley scored his 2nd touchdown of the year last week against the Chiefs. If you are really hurting at wide receiver and you got some buys and injuries and whatnot, Beasley does have a very safe floor of 8 to 10 half PPR fantasy points. I kind of mentioned him before when I was talking about Adam Humphries. Between the 2 of them, I would rather have Cole Beasley. Panthers at Saints. So this is a special game for Teddy Bridgewater.
Revenge.
Yeah, it's a revenge game for Teddy Bridgewater. Mike Davis only had 2 catches on 3 targets last week after seeing 33 targets in weeks 2 through 5. He still scored, though, 4 straight games with a touchdown now. The Saints have allowed the 6th fewest receptions to running backs, too. So I think Davis is still a start, but don't expect him to get eight catches a game like he did in weeks 2 or 3. Robbie Anderson only saw 5 targets last week. He had double-digit targets in 3 of the previous 4 games. Still had 4 catches for 77 yards, not too bad, but he did not see as much looks as he normally had. DJ Moore, on the other hand, was the double-digit target guy last week. Seems like this offense can't support both receivers in the same game. There's only been 1 game this year that they have both seen 10 or more targets. But you got to start them both every week because you just don't know, especially in PPR, you just don't know which one it's going to be. Alvin Kamara has averaged 18.5 half PPR fantasy points a game over his 5 career games against the Panthers. He's the high-priced guy in daily fantasy that I'm going to be paying up for this week. Michael Thomas will hopefully make his return after missing 3 games with an ankle sprain and then getting suspended by the team for a game before the bye. I'm sure he's going to be ready to rock and roll for this one. Emmanuel Sanders, if for whatever reason Michael Thomas does not play, then Emmanuel Sanders becomes a must start. He had 12 catches on 14 targets for 122 yards without Michael Thomas in week 5. He and Breeze definitely started to build some chemistry. I think Sanders isn't a bad play even if Michael Thomas does play. Sanders is a really good veteran wide receiver. The game is in New Orleans. That combo of Sean Payton and Drew Brees is one of the most surgical combos of play caller and quarterback of all time. So I like Emmanuel Sanders, honestly, really, if Michael Thomas does play. Jared Cook, if Michael Thomas is back, I would sit Jared Cook. He's only had 3 targets in each of the last 2 games. And the Panthers had been pretty good against tight ends before last week's game against Jimmy Graham and Cole Kmet. So I'm sitting Jared Cook. Packers at Titans. We got Aaron Jones. I hit on Aaron Jones' under 69.5 rushing yards last week against the Buccaneers. That Tampa Bay run D is just nasty. Little tip, if you're interested in playing an under on a yardage prop, don't put the bet in early. Wait it out. Put in the bet late because chances are the numbers are going to go up because everyone wants to play overs. Nobody wants to play an under, right? So by Sunday morning, there's a good chance that number that you were looking at, it was 69.5 Sunday morning. It was, I think, 64 on Tuesday or Wednesday. So me waiting until the end of the week, that pretty much bought myself an extra 5 yards. Didn't need it because he only had 15 yards rushing. But, that's the way I would approach a under prop if you're going to look at yardage. Aaron Jones will rebound in this game, though. The Texans have allowed the most rushing yards in the league. They lead by 250 more yards than the next team, which is kind of amazing. Davante Adams had somewhat of a disappointing game returning from that hamstring injury. Only 60 yards on 6 catches. Considering the Packers were down 18 points to start the second half, and then they were down 28 points going into the fourth quarter, you'd think Davante Adams would see more than 10 targets. But I guess they were trying to work him in and not really ask too much of the guy. They did lose him for 4 games last year, and it was not pretty. So I think they're going to take their time with Davante Adams. Robert Tonyan had a touchdown in weeks 2 and 3, and then he had that 30 fantasy point game in week 4. It's looking like we have another weapon emerging here with Aaron Rodgers, and if he gives us 4 fantasy points, or he only gave us 4 fantasy points last week, but Tonyan will still probably make my tight end touchdown scorer parlay because the Texans just gave up 8 catches and 113 yards and a touchdown to freaking Anthony Ferkser. The Texans are 9th right now in fantasy points allowed to tight ends. So I'm excited about starting Tonyan in my Dynasty League. I just picked him up last week while he was on his bye. I'm really hoping that he turns into another legit weapon for Aaron Rodgers to consistently target. David Johnson, I was surprised to see him get 19 carries in a game that they were down 14-0 after the first quarter. He scored his 3rd touchdown of the year last week as well. I think David Johnson is definitely a start in Week 7 against the Packers' run defense that is 4th in fantasy points allowed to running backs as of right now. Will Fuller had the biggest day of all the Texan wide receivers with 123 yards and a touchdown last week. He led the team in targets with 11, but Brandon Cooks and Randall Cobb both scored 2. Cooks caught all 9 of his targets, so in this game that I think is going to be high scoring, both Fuller and Cooks are definitely good plays. Darren Fells also scored last week, his second touchdown of the year. He might make my tight end touchdown scorer parlay after the Packers gave up the first touchdown to a tight end against Gronk last week. Browns at Bengals, a good old AFC North showdown. We've got Kareem Hunt, like I just mentioned earlier. The Bengals have given up the second most rushing yards this year, behind only the Texans. So Hunt should also have a bounce-back game. Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham combined for 5 catches for 65 yards last week against the Steelers. They killed my over from last week. Austin Hooper, the Bengals have allowed the 3rd most receiving yards and the 5th most receptions to tight ends this year. Hooper actually had the most targets and receiving yards for the Bengals last week. For the Browns last week. I think this is a game that the Browns try to run the ball 30-plus times and use the tight ends up the middle of the field. You know, they'll take a couple deep shots and trick plays to keep the diva wide receivers happy, but I think it's going to be one of those uglier games. So I'm going to take a look at Austin Hooper's receiving props when they do come out. Joe Mixon had a solid game with 70 total yards and a touchdown with a pair of catches, but he dropped a second touchdown in the end zone, and then he lost a goal line carry to Giovanni Bernard, who punched it in for a touchdown. He also left the game for a minute to get checked out, but apparently he's fine. ESPN, Yahoo, and Sleeper all have him as with a healthy tag, so I'm not going to worry about Joe Mixon. Giovanni Bernard, if for whatever reason there is something wrong with Joe Mixon, Bernard would be a great play for PPR leagues. He would probably catch a good 6 to 8 balls, and we just saw him convert a goal line carry, so he would be awesome. If you're a Mixon owner and you don't have Giovanni Bernard, look around the NFL, handcuff your top running backs, especially when it's such a clear number 1 and 2 situation like it is in Cincinnati. Tyler Boyd I hit on Boyd's reception props last week. It was freaking 4.5. He's gone over that in 4 of his 6 games. I've also been hitting on Joe Burrow's over on completions. It's been between 22.5 and 23.5 each game. He's also gone over in 4 of his 6 games. Cleveland has allowed, on average, 26 completions a game. So Burrow has averaged 26.6 completions a game with a low of 19 and a high of 27. So I really like this Joe Burrow over on completions again this week. And I'll probably, if I can get that on a same-game parlay, I'll probably tag it with Tyler Boyd's over on receptions as well. But Tyler Boyd did take a pretty gnarly hit and got his leg kind of bent up. Again, he is apparently all good to go. He's apparently healthy as well, so I'm not going to get too worried about him. T. Higgins had his first 100-plus yard game, caught 6 of his 8 targets. He got 67 of his 125 yards on one big play, but it was good to see him in a weird game where A.J. Green actually led the team in targets, and all 3 of their tight ends and all 3 of their touchdowns were in the running game. So Higgins still had a really good game. A.J. Green, 96-yard game last week, shows how powerful this offense can be if all 3 wide receivers are healthy and Burrow gets some protection. I think all 3 of these Bengal wide receivers are worth a start again this week, too. Next, we got the Lions at the Falcons. Adrian Peterson scored last week, back-to-back games with a touchdown. He's got 57% of the carries for the Lions on the season. He's averaging 4 yards a carry, but the Falcons have allowed the 7th fewest rushing yards to running backs, but the 2nd most receiving yards to running backs. So that's why I like the rookie much better in this game. DeAndre Swift had his first 100-plus yard game last week. He has the highest yards per carry of the 3 Detroit running backs. He's seen 20 targets on the season, the most of all the Detroit running backs, including the converted cornerback Jamal Agnew, who's got 8 of the team's 40 running back targets. Kerryon Johnson owners, I feel your pain. I think Swift is going to have another big game here. Matthew Stafford loves targeting his running backs. Every year I feel like we see a Lions running back catch a bunch of passes on Thanksgiving. Hopefully we have the next fun PPR Lions RB emerging here. Kenny Galladay had a touchdown in weeks 3 and 4 coming off of an injury, and then he had a big 104-yard game last week on 4 catches. The Falcons have been eaten up by wide receivers. Adam Thielen and the rookie Justin Jefferson both scored last week. Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore each had 90-plus yards in week 5. Allen Robinson had a 120-yard game in week and a touchdown in week 3. Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb each had over 100 yards in week 2. And DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett each had over 90 yards in week 1. So play Kenny Galladay. In DFS, PPR, 3 wide receivers, whatever the hell league you play in, you're going to want to play Kenny Galladay this week. TJ Hawkinson has touchdowns in back-to-back games, only 2 catches in each game, but he leads the Lions in targets and receiving touchdowns, and this is a great matchup for him. The Falcons let Robert Tonyan catch all 6 of his targets for 98 yards and 3 touchdowns in week 4, and then old-ass Kyle Rudolph even had 47 yards on 3 catches last week against the Falcons, so I like TJ Hawkinson as well. Todd Gurley had the most touches all year last week against the Vikings, 20 carries with 3 catches for 67 total yards. The Lions are giving up the 4th most fantasy points to running backs, so Gurley is a solid RB2 again this week. Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley, the Falcons' passing game, they had a splash week last week. Julio had 30.5 half PPR fantasy points. Ridley had 16. I told y'all last week to start Hayden Hurst, that he should have a good game. He gave us 13.7 points. The Lions are another deceptive team against tight ends. No team has seen fewer tight end targets than the Lions defense, and as a result, they've allowed the fewest receiving yards to tight ends. Hurst is seeing about 5 targets a game, so I'm gonna sit him in this game actually. Moving on, we got Seahawks and Cardinals. Chris Carson has scored in every game but one so far this season. I know this dude doesn't get the same amount of hype that, Marshawn Lynch used to get, but Chris Carson is a beast. He had a pretty serious injury to end the season last year, and the Seattle offense has definitely become more pass-heavy, but he's still a great running back, and I think he's going to get better as the offense regresses back to the mean and they start running the ball a little bit more as the weather gets worse. Chris Carson will probably get better. Tyler Lockett had 3 straight awesome games to start the season, but his last 2 have been somewhat disappointing with only 6 catches in the 2 games combined, but he'll be fine. Keep him in your fantasy leagues, in your lineups. DK Metcalf is the next Terrell Owens, if you ask me, but hopefully without the drama. He is a freak, and he just keeps getting better and better. I have DK in a few leagues, and he's probably the one guy I look at every week, and I look at his projection, and I go, yeah, I think he's going to hit that projection. I think he's going to hit that number. Kenyon Drake finally had his breakout game, 164 rushing yards on 20 carries with 2 touchdowns. One of them was a 69-yard run, but he still only saw 2 targets and didn't catch either of them. He's still an RB2 flex, but I'd really like to see those receiving numbers go up, but it doesn't seem like it's going to happen anytime soon. DeAndre Hopkins, only 2 catches last week, but this Seahawks pass defense has been one of the worst in football, so he should be able to bounce back. And then Christian Kirk kind of had his first breakout game as well. He, too, only caught 2 passes, but both were for touchdowns. He set his season high in receiving yards in a game with 86. I have him in a bunch of leagues, and I'm starting him as a flex in what should be a fun game with a lot of points. What do we got next? We got the Jags at the Chargers. James Robinson had his low mark for total yards last week with 53, but he caught all 4 of his passes. All 4 of his targets, 1 for a touchdown. He was one of my touchdown scorers for last week's podcast picks, so I was very happy to see that he scored. The Chargers have one of the best, or not one of the best, but one of the better run defenses. The only touchdowns they've allowed to running backs have been through the passing game, which kind of works out because I think the Jags will be trailing in this game for the majority of their possessions, so Robinson's best chance to score will probably be catching the ball anyway. DJ Shark only caught half of his 15 targets for just 47 yards last week, but 14 targets are 14 targets, right? So we're still playing DJ Shark. Keelan Cole had a huge game last week, 143 yards on 6 catches. He's now had a touchdown or 100-plus yards in 4 of the Jags' 6 games. I think the Chargers are going to put up points, so I think Cole is not a horrible play this week either. Laviska Shenault, however, though, only had 3 targets last week, did not... he did have another rushing attempt, but, he didn't really do anything with it. Last week was the first week that his snap counts went over 70%. I don't know what the hell to do with Laviska Shenault, to be completely honest. I guess he's a start, but I'm telling you, I'm not comfortable starting him. Justin Jackson is definitely the RB you want for the Chargers. He had 20 touches to Josh Kelly's 12. Jackson was the much better running back. Keenan Allen caught his only 2 targets from last week, but he did score. He left the game early with some back spasms, and he is still questionable, but I'm sure he'll play and he'll be awesome. He was averaging 12 targets a game through the first 4 games. The rookie quarterback seems to be smart and knows to throw the ball to your best player. Mike Williams, I think, is a great play for daily fantasy this week. In the Chargers' last game, Williams caught a 64-yard bomb for a touchdown, but then also got a touchdown from the 4-yard line. So he's one of those unique, quote-unquote, deep threat players because he's also going to get work in the red zone as well. The Jags have allowed the 8th most receiving yards to wide receivers, so I like Mike Williams to get his hands on 1 or 2 deep balls and maybe score in this game. Hunter Henry, the Jags have given up 5 touchdowns to tight ends already this year. Henry got his first touchdown in week 5. Hopefully they spent some time over the bye working on getting Henry just a little more involved, but there's one guy on this team that scares me as someone who drafted Hunter Henry in a few leagues. Donald Parham, the former XFL standout tight end. I watched every single XFL game for those 5 or 6 weeks that it was going on, and Donald Parham was a touchdown machine. All right, he scored. He already scored in week 4, only 2 targets on the year, but I'm going to assume that they also spent a little time figuring out ways to get him more involved because he's a monster. He's 6'8", and he's got good hands. So Parham will get a spot on my tight end touchdown score parlay if they offer it. I'm not sure if they're going to offer him as a option for a touchdown score. Next, we got the 49ers at the Patriots. Raheem Mostert is hurt again and will probably miss a few weeks with an ankle sprain. The Pats are one of only 4 teams to have only allowed 2 or less touchdowns to running backs. So I don't expect a big game from Jerick McKinnon. Last week was actually Jermichael Hasty, who got the most carries and had the highest yards per carry of the 3 running backs. Deebo Samuel scored last week, and I think they're going to need him more in this game with Mostert down. Maybe Deebo gets a handful of carries instead of just 1 like he's gotten in the past couple games. I'm going to be checking on Deebo Samuel's reception props as well. If it's 4.5, 5.5, I would definitely take the over. George Kittle is the man, but the Pats have been one of the best teams against tight ends. They held Darren Waller to just 2 catches and Travis Kelce to only 3 catches. So I might also take a look at Kelce's reception prop and consider taking the under if they have it up around 7 or 8 or whatever. Damian Harris, big letdown last week. Only 6 carries for 19 yards, 17 in the previous game for 100 yards. I don't expect him to do much at all in this game either. The 49ers run D is really good. James White has caught 8 of 9 targets last week, and I think he had 10 targets the week before. I think there's no reason why that won't continue. So I'm flexing James White in a full PPR league. Chiefs at Broncos. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, fresh off the news that the team signed Le'Veon Bell. Clyde had his best day rushing, still hasn't scored since week 1, and I'm afraid Clyde is going to lose all of that goal line work to Le'Veon Bell. Clyde hasn't been very good in the red zone, and especially on the goal line. Bell isn't the biggest back in the world, but he's patient, and he hits the hole with purpose. Hopefully he doesn't lose too much of that passing game work to Le'Veon Bell, because then I think Clyde would probably be nothing more than a lower tier RB2, maybe even a flex, which is not where I drafted him, and a lot of people drafted him. Le'Veon Bell, he's going to be good for the team, but it's going to give them another option, another guy to make plays. Plus, if he tries to come in and be a tough guy, be a diva, Travis Kelce will just straight up choke slam his ass through a table. It's going to be very interesting to see what Andy Reid does with these guys. The Broncos have allowed the fewest fantasy points to RBs this year, so I'm not going to overreact if they both have bad games. We'll just have to see how it shakes out. Tyreek Hill had a touchdown and 74 yards on 3 catches last year in Denver, and in 2018 he caught 9 balls for 54 yards. So he should be just fine. Travis Kelce, not a great matchup for him, but it doesn't matter because Travis Kelce is the man. Philip Lindsay had 23 carries last week with no Melvin Gordon to split touches with. He hadn't played since week 1, and he had 100 yards against the Patriots, which is not very easy to do. He's a pretty easy start to me, even against the Chiefs, if Melvin Gordon is out. If we get word that Melvin Gordon is going to play this game, then obviously this becomes a bit of a tougher decision, but I think I'm going to play Philip Lindsay no matter what. Tim Patrick, back-to-back games with over 100 yards receiving, 2 of the last 3 games with a touchdown. He's led the team in targets each of the last 2 games. He's become one of the most productive wide receivers for the Broncos in the absence of Cortland Sutton. He's a good start here, too, because I think he'll see the targets again in this game, and they will inevitably be trailing because the Chiefs are going to put up points. Jerry Jeudy, only 2 catches in each of the last 2 games. He did score his first touchdown of the year in Week 4 against the Jets, but only 9 targets combined over the last 2 games after getting 7 to 9 targets in each of the first 3 games. So the past 2 games have really kind of fallen off for Jerry Jeudy. Yes, I'm sure they'll have to throw the ball more in this game, but I'm keeping him on my bench. We got 2 games left here. We got the Bucs at the Raiders, Super Bowl 38 rematch. Ronald Jones with his 3rd straight 100-plus yard game. He had 2 touchdowns on 25 carries, or 25 touches, sorry. 3rd straight game with 20 or more touches. He is a must-start against this Raiders run D that has allowed 8 running back touchdowns already this year. Chris Godwin has had one of his worst games last week, with only 5 catches for 48 yards. He hasn't had that big game yet this year, but maybe this is the week. The Raiders have actually been pretty decent against wide receivers this year, so I'm not counting on it. They've allowed the 3rd fewest receptions and the 6th fewest receiving yards to wide receivers. Mike Evans only caught 1 of his 2 targets for 10 yards last week, but we're obviously still starting him. Tyler Johnson might be emerging as their number 3, with Scotty Miller being so inconsistent. Johnson caught a touchdown last week after leading the team in receiving yards the week before. I'm not saying start the guy, but maybe he's worth throwing at the end of your bench. Gronk caught his first touchdown as a Buccaneer last week, led the team in targets and receiving yards. The Raiders have been pretty good against tight ends as well, 5th fewest receptions and the 4th fewest receiving yards to tight ends. I'm actually playing Gronk in a league that I have Mark Andrews and Mike Gesicki both on bye this week, so I think Gronk is a pretty safe start. Josh Jacobs is averaging 24 touches a game. He's coming off the bye, so he should be nice and rested up. And plus, we get a revenge game for John Gruden here. But the Bucs were allowing the fewest rushing yards per game in the league before last week when they played Green Bay, one of the best rushing teams in the league, and they shut them down. Held Aaron Jones to just 1.5 yards per carry. So I think Buccaneers actually brought their number down, which is pretty crazy. So I know after a bye you want to get your top guys back into your lineups, but you might want to consider sitting Josh Jacobs if you have other options, because like I said, this Buccaneers run defense is really good. Darren Waller, the Bucs have allowed the 10th fewest receptions to tight ends, so it's a pretty tough matchup for Darren Waller too, but he has 27% of his team's targets. You never sit a guy who's seeing 27% of his team's targets. Henry Ruggs III, only 11 targets in 3 games now. He had 118 yards and a touchdown in Week 5, but it was only on 2 big catches. He's just too unreliable. The Bucs have allowed the second fewest explosive pass plays this year. That's a pass play of 15 yards or more. I'm not playing Ruggs. Hunter Renfrow has seen the most wide receiver targets on the team this year, but he's only averaging about 50 yards a game, so I'm not starting him. I guess I would only start him in full PPR leagues if I have a bunch of guys on bye. And last but not least, we got the Bears at the Rams. David Montgomery, 18 catches in his last 3 games. Rams have allowed the 6th most receptions and the 5th most receiving yards to running backs this year. So I like David Montgomery to continue contributing in the passing game. Allen Robinson is the Bears' number 1 guy, and it's not even close as far as the number 2 in targets. Jimmy Graham is currently tied for the 2nd most red zone targets in the league, but it was Cole Kmet who scored last week. He's only seen 5 targets on the season, but he caught his first touchdown last week. And I think the Bears will gradually get him more and more involved. The Rams are tied for the 8th most receptions allowed to tight ends, so I might consider one of these guys on my tight end touchdown scorer parlay, but I'm not sure yet. And for Nick Foles, it's a special game for him as well.
Revenge.
Yeah, he used to be a St. Louis Ram before they moved out to California. Darrell Henderson, 14 carries last week, 14 or more touches in 4 of the 6 games this year. But the Bears have a pretty solid run D. They've allowed the 10th fewest fantasy points to running backs. I'm still starting Darrell Henderson. The Rams have the 6th most rushing attempts per game. So I like Henderson to keep getting the work, and hopefully he can sneak into the end zone. Cooper Kupp, only 3 catches on 9 targets last week. I don't know if he's ever only caught a third of his targets. Fewest receptions on his 2nd most targets on the season, so very unlike him last week. Robert Woods has a touchdown in 4 of his last 5 games. We're still playing both of these guys, even though it seems like the offense has definitely become more run-heavy. One guy we are not starting anymore from this team, Tyler Higbee, set his new season high mark for receiving yards last week, but still only at 56 yards. Besides his 3 touchdown game on 5 catches back in week 2, Higbee has only caught 2 or 3 balls each week. I think he's a sit against the Bears D that is middle of the pack against tight ends. Higbee is just not as involved as we thought he'd be after that crazy, last 5 games or so to finish out the season last year. Sorry, excuse me. So that's going to do it for the picks. Let's take a hot minute and we'll get into the podcast picks. All right, my podcast picks for week 7. So I went 6-3 last week, back to 62%, and I'm still undefeated with my road dogs of the week. I'm 6-0 on my road dogs now. So let's get into these picks for week 7, man. I'm taking the Saints minus 7.5 versus the Panthers. The Panthers' run defense is still very bad. Alvin Kamara has had a field day against the Panthers in his career. There will be some fans in the building for this game, which if there's any team that benefits from having fans, it's the Saints. They're coming off the bye, and they're getting the best wide receiver in football back, Michael Thomas. So I think the Saints I think they're going to win this game by 1 score. I would buy this down to 6.5 if you can, just so that way you only need to win by that 1 touchdown. There's one thing I forgot about this game when I was doing my preview a minute ago, and that is
revenge.
Yes. Revenge for Teddy Bridgewater. Oh, wait, I'm an idiot. I did hit it. Wow. Maybe I'm just trying to double up with my revenge drops here. I don't know. My next pick is the Packers minus 3.5 at the Texans. The Packers are coming off an embarrassing loss on primetime to the Buccaneers. The run game got shut down. I think this is a get-right game for the Packers. The Texans have allowed the most rushing yards and rushing touchdowns this year, and they're also in the top 7 in passing yards allowed. So I think Rodgers is going to just do whatever the hell he wants to in this game against this Houston defense. And my third pick against the spread is going to be the Cowboys -1 against the Washington football team. The Cowboys offense is just too loaded with talent to be as bad as they were last week. They have a veteran quarterback, an all-pro running back, and the best trio of wide receivers in the league. Washington's defense has definitely gotten a lot better with those two monsters on the edges and a few good defensive backs, but I don't think Washington is going to be able to keep up with the Cowboys. Give me the Cowboys to win in this division game. My over for week 7 is going to be the Lions at the Falcons, over 54.5. The Lions have averaged just under 30 points a game over the past 3 games, and 2 of them were on the road. We just saw the Falcons explode against the Vikings last week. Both of these defenses are not very good, and both offenses look like they are finally 100% healthy. I think this could be one of the more higher-scoring games of the week, if not the highest-scoring game of the week. So give me the Lions at the Falcons over 54.5. My under for week 7, 49ers at Patriots, under 43.5. The 49ers are coming to the East Coast for the 3rd time in 7 games, and they're down their top running back, Raheem Mostert. I think the Patriots are going to limit George Kittle to only a handful of catches because the Pats have already done a great job at limiting Darren Waller and Travis Kelce. The 49ers have averaged only 20 points over the last 3 games, while the Pats have only scored 22 points over the last 2 games combined. Granted, one of those was without Cam Newton. But the 49ers have one of the best run defenses in the league. We just saw what the Broncos were able to do against the Patriots in New England. I think this is a ugly game, and I think it's a low-scoring game, so give me the under 43.5. My TD scores for Week 7, kind of risky here. All my TD scores are kind of correlated with my picks against the spread and my over-unders, so hopefully everything works out for me. I'm taking Aaron Jones. Like I mentioned, how bad the Texans' run defense is. I think Aaron Jones plays like a man on a mission after getting stuffed last week by the Buccaneers. Alvin Kamara is my second touchdown scorer. With Michael Thomas back, I think Kamara will probably see less targets, but it should help him, should help open things up, take some eyes off of Kamara and put him on Michael Thomas. And the Panthers' run defense is better than it was last year, but that's not saying much. They were atrocious last year, and they're still pretty bad this year, so I like Alvin Kamara to score. And my third TD scorer for Week 7 is going to be Kenny Golladay. Kind of mentioned it before. He's got a touchdown or 100 yards in each of the last 3 games he's played this year. The Falcons have allowed the second most explosive plays this year. Golladay connected on a 43-yard bomb and was tackled at the 5-yard line last week. I think he gets into the end zone this week. And let's fire up the road dog.
Oh, you didn't know? Your ass better call somebody.
My road dog of the week for Week 7. I'm going to go with the Pittsburgh Steelers getting 1.5 at the Titans. The Steelers have allowed the fewest rushing yards this season. I think they'll get all up in Derrick Henry's grill. I think the Titans struggle to put up points in this game. And on the other side, the Steelers have been playing great. They've put up 38 points in each of the last 2 games. This is the rescheduled game that got postponed a few weeks ago. The Steelers were not very happy about them being forced to take like an impromptu bye week. The players weren't able to get those few days off that you usually get on a normally scheduled bye week. So I think they come out and kind of unleash some frustrations on the Titans defense. So give me Pittsburgh on the money line. I don't even need the 1.5. Just give me them on the money line. So that's going to do it for the podcast picks for Week 7, and that's going to do it for the Week 7 edition of the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm sorry, guys. I know I keep saying that I'm going to try and get it to under half hour, and every freaking time it seems like I go to at least 40 minutes. So I'm sorry. I'm going to try again next week. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you check us out next week, and as always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. For more great episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Kickin' or Stickin' is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach.tv, or your favorite podcast service. Kickin' or Stickin' is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gambling operates the National Problem Gambling Helpline Network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to play responsibly and always look for your man downfield.
It's how I take care of me, so I can take care of everyone else. I simply wouldn't be without it. Made in Ireland, made for me.
Sharon has discovered the power of Revive Active. Revive Active is an award-winning super supplement containing 26 active ingredients, including vitamin C, D and zinc, which support the immune system, all in one handy daily sachet. Made for busy, hectic lives, it's the convenient way to put back what life takes out. Enrich your life with Revive Active.
Using your smart speaker for this.
Okay, I've added cheese to your shopping list.
Yeah, that's pretty smart. But shopping online with SuperValue? That's even smarter. Have the best produce hand-picked and delivered straight to your door. Download the SuperValue app now or shop online at supervalue.ie.